are B2B, either suppliers or distributors that are looking at this or ready to take the next level, start with this, right? Start with this, because if you're going to go through the process with purpose and not just regurgitating someone else's standards, right? Because if they did start to, right, how many of these suppliers are also selling on Amazon, right? So on Amazon, they pretty much know their standards of what they like. So they just kind of build that in as the number one retailer. They build it into their own internal standards. So they're doing it anyway. So now, before you go build out content for the rest of your catalog, or you're going to update it off of those standards, get your own codes specific to you so that you will far outperform any of your competitors.
George, we met a couple weeks ago and we started talking about content and product detail pages. And you pulled up this report and said you had to show it to me. And I found it really, really interesting. Let's talk about where this came from and why you even felt like creating such a report that we're about to see today.
Yeah, so it goes back, actually, let me backtrack a touch. So I've been in industry for a while, and so I've seen that evolution of product content on both retail and B2B sites. And where we started years and years and years ago were just interactive product demos, right? If you remember those little demo buttons that you'd see on the retailer sites. And then that enhanced version came, the below the fold Amazon A+. Then we saw that kind of take off. Meanwhile, there always were, obviously imagery, 360 rotations, the PDFs, everything else that was in it. Then over the years, probably the last, 8 years or so, we started to see some standards hit the industry. And a lot of those were just created by companies in content, and they weren't really based on too much information. Then you'd have someone like an Amazon or a Walmart with their style guide start to share what they prefer, right? So your titles should be roughly 80 characters in length. It should have those keywords. You should not have one image. You should have multiple images, right? So these are all the standards we've all seen, and they've been regurgitated over and over again from marketing blogs. And so it's what everybody considers to be the standards, as did I. But I kind of stumbled across this with a client that it is much more. And I think this is the evolution of where the standards are going to go. Right. So that's kind of how I got pulled in. Now, I was on a B2B webinar with Idea for Industry, and I was talking about how the B2B industry needed to create a B2C buying experience, right? Because all of those buyers are buying on Amazon or whatever else they're buying and where. As a consumer, they're used to that. So that was kind of, the main topic of that webinar. And their now CEO, Jeffrey Moyle, reached out to me afterwards and said, hey, let's talk and let's see if you could kind of help our team. And so I went in and joined Nadia and Tyler and the rest of the team, who were absolutely some of the best people I've ever worked with. And where we kind of took the project was I started looking at from the whole content process, from onboarding from their syndicators or from the brands themselves. What are their existing standards they're looking for? Who it hits next, which is the category managers, then item management, and then ultimately PIM, and then the web shop, right? Pretty typical. And I was able to go through, and I won't give the details of what I proposed to them, but there are definitely some improvements that could happen. In the meantime, part of the other process was auditing content, right? So, my previous involvement with Content Status, it's an auditing tool, very similar to a Profitero or an Edge, something like that, but it's self-service and it's instant results. So we said, let's audit 10,000 items. Right? And these are things you can't do manually unless there's someone on your team that you hate and you want them to quit. So we have to automate that. So ran it through the system, automated all 10,000 items, brought it down. I customized all the scorecards within that tool, had it check for certain keywords, just everything that you can do in there itself. And then when I asked them, I said, you know what would be really interesting is, could you share your conversion data? And we've all asked for that type of data over the years from people, and typically it's never shared. And they said, absolutely. What are you going to do with it? Now, as a content geek, now I'm like, oh my God, I'm finally going to have all this conversion data. I said, well, I'm gonna instead of just saying, hey, how long are your titles or how long are your descriptions, how many images, let's apply this and see if there are some trends when we actually put in the conversion data. So for all 10,000 items, I had the add to cart conversions and the actual sales conversions for each. I had the cost or the price, and then also the units sold over a 12-month period. It was pure gold. It was absolutely pure gold. And I was so thankful that they shared that.
Before you go on, tell the audience that doesn't know what Idea for Industry is. Like, what are they as because they're an organization. They're not necessarily a distributor themselves. Tell the audience what Idea is.
Yeah, so they were founded from two of the commercial electrical industry associations brought together, and it's a great group of people, and they work hard to help create the standards in content for that industry, as well as they provide services that bring in the data, normalize it, and then syndicate it out to people like a Rexel, right, and others. So that's what they do.
So they're like a data pool, essentially. They started, I believe the distributor association was the National Association of Electrical Distributors, NAED. What was?
Yes.
Do you know who the manufacturing one was? NAEM or NAME?
I don't off the top of my head.
But so it basically acts like a data pool, right? So they collect data and then they can publish and syndicate that out to their distributor partners or manufacturer partners that way.
Yeah.
All right.
And they do a lot more too. They do fitment and, variations. So if this product isn't in stock, these also work with it. So they do a lot more than just that. But my workings with them and in this was my previous workings with them was really along the lines of auditing product content and what to look for. So they participated in this along with content status because they all felt that the data that would come out of actually applying conversion data to help create those standards is the right way to go. And we were all just very curious as to what was going to come out of it.
Amazing. So I kind of interrupted you in the middle of that. You were talking about what information is gold.
Yeah. So anytime you can actually get item level conversion data, right, which everybody's wanted over the years, but they can never really get. And so when I took all of the data for 10,000 items and then aligned it with the conversion elements and pricing and units sold over a 12-month period, you started to see some things come through. Now, that data had to be cleaned because there were a lot of items that had really, really high conversion rates. And the reason for that is you have the sales teams going in and using the website as an ordering platform, right? We've seen that, which is one of the kind of takeaways that I have from this is the web shop team, right? The e-commerce team has to be able to segment out all the users so that when you have that conversion data, it's a cleaner version, right? So whether it's internal, external, whether it's commodity buying, right? And it's just repeat. So you're going to have a naturally high conversion. So and then the other thing, we did test for product content and the returns impact as well. So the last piece was making sure that when people are returning things in store that they bought online, that the in-store people can market as such, right? It was purchased online, right? So you can start to the stores need to say, why are you returning this? Exactly like an Amazon would, or a Grainger or anything else, right? You've got to be able to segment that data.
Makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, it's a lot of common sense, and it's just that as the B2B group has, all the companies have slowly grown, right? It's baby steps, it's this step forward, it's this step forward. But so going back to the analysis that we did, so it was 10,000 items. I immediately removed everything that had massively high conversion rates, and we said, forget it. Those are outliers. So we removed those, and we wanted to kind of balance it across categories. So we balanced those. So in the end, we ended up with 6,000 items that went into this study. Now, what I started to find, because we take 6,000 items and there are over 70 different data points on each that I was looking for. So there's over 720,000 total data points that I looked at. And as someone that's, really kind of geeks out about this and is so interested in the conversion impact of types of content, I just spent so much time in this, and I was doing it for free at towards the end, just because I wanted to continue to digest this.
What that is. That's cool.
Yeah. And so the biggest learning that I would say is that evolution of content, right, from just having everybody go in and follow those same basic standards, that is old, right? Now that everybody is slowly starting to catch up, based off of the data that I saw, that's old, and it's time for new standards. And that's kind of what started to come out of this report.
Yeah.
Right. And there's things that you're not going to like about the new standards. And there's things you're really going to like about the standards. So number one, what you're not going to like the fact that I can't tell you what those are. So unlike, you have all your standards and you've got to follow these to a T for every product, I can't just tell you exactly what those standards are for everybody. And I'll tell you why in a minute. That's because they are different for everybody. So the days of everybody kind of just following the same rules, they are different. And that was like my biggest takeaway off of this, was as I went by different categories, different suppliers, these conversion cheat codes were different for each. Okay. And the last thing they're not going to like about it is you're not going to want to have to redo your content improvements again. Right. But what you're going to like is that anything you create or edit is going to have an identified conversion impact. So instead of just saying, I'm going to create titles that are roughly 80 characters long, I'm going to tell you exactly what's in those titles that is going to drive higher conversions for a specific brand in a specific category. But that's just surface level, right? That's not much of a variation from the standards that are out today, right? But what you're going to like is when you have your custom cheat codes, you will absolutely maximize your conversion rates. We're talking 15% improvements would be low. Okay. You're going to obviously improve the customer experience. And the other thing that came out of here, because when I have all the data matched with sales data and price, I was able to give them the exact ROI on spend on improving that content.
George, I don't see as many standards as I see like platform implementation and limitations that create the standard. So in our B2B world, we don't really have like what you call PDP for everybody watching, product detail page is what that means. When you look at a PDP, it's different mainly because either the platform implementation just did it that way, or there was a limitation on the platform that said you could only have 80 characters. I don't actually think we've actually put that much thought into what is the best structure of a product detail page. So you say that this is a paradigm shift. I'm arguing that maybe this is the first time we've actually talked about what should be on a product detail page in B2B versus Amazon, Walmart, Target that have their own standards. I don't think we've defined those. Some companies have defined their own standards. They haven't published those standards in any way. They display them. They haven't been published. And certainly in the mid-market, for companies under $2 billion distributors or manufacturers, those standards just don't exist. And we've just kind of done whatever someone's told us to do.
Right.
And so I love this because I think it's the first time we can actually say, draw a line to, okay, here's kind of directionally where some standards might need to go. And then you're arguing to take that even a step further of this really does need to be customized to your industry, your product categories, your customer base, right?
Yeah, to your brand. Is what I saw, because I saw differing, cheat codes by brand within this one distributor, right? But you're absolutely right, because when I was going through them at the time with their old PIM, there was a limitation of 40 characters. So even if the suppliers would send in longer titles, it just got cut off, or it's cut off in ERP, right? So that's what the B2B industry is still catching up on.
Yep.
But it was about 2013. I was sitting in I think we're past NDAs, but I won't do it anyway. I had a very large ongoing partnership with a home improvement retailer.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working with them for like 12 years, and they brought me into this meeting. I was down on campus, and they had about 50 different suppliers in there. And back then, Lowe's has always been ahead of the game. Back then, it was, hey, your conversion rates will double just going from one image to two. Right. That's how far evolved we've gone. That's just standard now, right? You want as many images as possible. So that's how long it's been. Now with this, if there are B2B, either suppliers or distributors that are looking at this or ready to take the next level, start with this, right? Start with this, because if you're going to go through the process with purpose, and not just regurgitating someone else's standards, right? Because if they did start to, right, how many of these suppliers are also selling on Amazon, right? So on Amazon, they pretty much know their standards of what they like. So they just kind of build that in as the number one retailer. They build it into their own internal standards. So they're doing it anyway. So now, before you go build out content for the rest of your catalog, or you're going to update it off of those standards, get your own codes specific to you so that you will far outperform any of your competitors.
I love that. So we might change this cheat codes to higher PDP conversions to the first standard for B2B product detail pages.
Yes. Yeah. It could be. The problem is, like, as I mentioned before, why they're not going to like it. It's not just a standard.
Not just a standard. Yeah. No,
right?
I get
it's
it.
Not like, here's your guide. Your guide is specific to you. Now, maybe it doesn't vary a ton from one to another, but I saw a lot of from category to category, from supplier to supplier.
Love it. Let's talk about some of them.
All right. So now we talked about it was 720,000 data points, and I started to look. And let me kind of flow through here a little bit. I'm going to skip through. So this is the full report, which they can reach out to me, and it gives them all the background on the report. And we started to look at. So the first thing that I always do is I look at the scoring for their system. Now, there are two sets of scores that I did for them. First, we scored content on what their existing limitations were. Like you mentioned, Justin, like a title length, or it doesn't even allow feature bullets. So we were able to adjust the scoring easily for that. That gave us a level of scoring. Then we had scoring at each level: product titles, descriptions, bullets, PDFs, images, 360s, videos, right? You can score on all of that. And then after all this, I did a separate scorecard of where they want to take their standards next, right? Based off of these findings. And then it would show them the gap of effort that is needed to go from old to new. Okay. The idea here is, at its core, is do everything with a purpose and not just because everyone else is doing it. Okay. So in here, like, here's an example, and this is all public data. So my client has a version of this that is much deeper for them. And while they allowed to share this, you won't find in here their specific conversion rates.
Yeah.
Right?
Great.
So everything, when you see a baseline, that's their baseline conversion rate. And then I'm able to tell them, based off of this, 56% of the items had an opportunity to increase their title scores. Okay. And these are the conversion rates. If they were in the bad category of less than 20 characters, which is insanely common in B2B.
Yes.
Right. They perform 41% lower conversions than the baseline. All right. So as we can see, the scores going up all the way up to the ones that had the highest titles for them were 12% above baseline. That's a difference of 53% conversion rate.
What's your gut on that when it comes to even longer? So I know that the limitation here was the previous PIM had 40 character limit. So a lot of this data was based off of that. What's your gut tell you about where the cutoff is for when a product title is too long? Like, is there a sweet spot that you are assuming not, or predicting not knowing?
I would just use the basics. So what I did was I created models for them to kind of come up with my recommendation on what their proper lengths should be, right? Now, in their PIM, the new PIM, and in the web shops, they can say, you know what, we'll allow just up to 200.
Yeah, sure.
Just like Amazon did, right? Or you can do less. It's really up to any client or any one site to determine what that is. I do think that most of the guidelines of trying to finish around 80 characters or so is important. But I think the question they have to ask themselves is, how many characters show up in the mobile experience?
Yeah, sure.
And then how many show up in the desktop experience? Because just because you allow 200, if the desktop's only going to show 150, then why bother?
Yeah, you don't want to be mid-word and get cut off.
Yeah, exactly. That's irritating. So I'm less than, what's a standard length. I'm about what should be in it. So there's about 20 different sample titles for different products, because some suppliers have a much longer name. So that's, extra characters. Then you want to always make sure, what's the product type, and then all of your core features, right? So whether it's voltage, amps, poles, depending on the category, colors, material, all of those variables that will also help with site search, those are also important.
Yeah.
So depending on the length of those individual things, I saw some samples that were closer to 150, right? But so I think the first question that people need to answer is, what's the limitation of the site that it'll take? What's the limitation of what's actually be able to be displayed on both the desktop and then the mobile, right? I would do that and start to work backwards from there.
Yeah, makes total sense.
Okay, so I went through this whole exercise with the product descriptions. 67% of their SKUs had an improvement opportunity, right? 57% conversion increase from those that had none to 24%, right? So another, looking at this again, if you had a description over 50 characters in length, your conversion rates were 24% higher than their baseline.
Wow.
Right? That's massive. And the other thing that I got so excited about in doing this report, I've never seen specific data. Someone might say, oh, your description should be X characters or your title is this long, but no one tells you why, right? This is the why behind everything that you should do, okay? Same thing with product images.
That last
images.
That last point you made on there, though, you said simply regurgitating the title and the product spec is not enough. Like having something just repeat on there isn't a description. It should be a description. Interesting.
Yep. But the bigger takeaways from just applying conversion rates to the content that I'll talk about kind of next, and this is what really kind of blew my mind and changed it for me, was the fact that it's not just about one content element. It's not just about what's in that content element, but it's about what other content elements are on that page and what appears in there. So they're all codependent on each other for maximum conversion rates. And I'm going to give you a great example in just a slide, right? So anybody seeing this, you're like, yeah, great. We've seen more images. And the client even said the same thing. We always knew more images were better, but we never had the conversion number to tell us what the actual impact would be.
130% difference between none, 136%.
Yeah. Now, if you look at that's 99%. Now, the other really interesting part of this, as I went through all this, having all the data available to me, I was able to combine everything and give them back a very specific conversion increase percentage if they fixed these 6,000 items to the standards that I gave them, right? Based off of their actual conversion data, right? Not something they found in a blog. And they were blown away by the number and all the proof behind it.
Yeah.
So this is where I'm saying this is the next evolution. It's not generic. It's customized and specific to your brand. Right?
Love it.
I wish I could tell you what their percentages was, but I can't. But it was really good. So these are some examples, additional cheat codes that start to prove the codependency of content elements and placement. All right. So this was an interesting thing. So if the brand name was not displayed anywhere on the page, that's the title, the description, the specs, traffic dropped as well in their rank, right? It dropped 7.4% in their rankings. They also gave me the traffic rankings of every individual product, right? Let's look at the product number. We know in B2B, the product number is key, right? Yeah. If someone is reordering, they're using the product number, whatever it is. If no product number was anywhere on the page, it was 36% below the baseline, okay? Now what we can see is, well, if it wasn't included in the title, it was only 16%. But if you include it in the specs, it was plus 56. But here's the key. If you put the product number in both the title and the specs.
Yeah, so they can find it no matter what, right? That's incredible.
Because all of us individually, we scan a page differently.
Yeah.
Right? And it depends. If it's buried in the description, then they might not see it there.
That's right.
Right? Title is great. Specs is always easy to find, but having it in all three is also impactful, right? Similar to dimensions. If they only appeared in the specs, it was actually lower than their baselines. It was only in the title. But if we start to look here, it appeared in the specs and the title. Now we're above baseline, right? It's multiple displays. And if it was also added to the descriptions, that's where we saw the big jump. What I've seen in the industry so far is that a lot of people aren't paying attention to the description.
Yeah, that's a really surprising one, because you would think that the dimensions should just be added to specs because it's just an attribute of the product, and to be included in both the description and the title for better conversion. I mean, that makes sense to me. Like once you say it, it makes sense to me. But I never would have designed a page that way.
Right. Because there's the basics that all of us think of.
Yeah.
Here's how we should do it. But the data proves differently.
Well, and I would argue too that, George, we have in B2B, because this is about like the story of the product and the description. A lot of times people say, we want to tell the story of the product in the description, right? Versus this is B2B. Someone's there to do their job. And part of their job is like, I got to make sure it meets these dimensions, these weights, these specs. And if we think about the customer's job in solving a problem, all of a sudden that makes sense that the description should help that customer do their job easier, doesn't have to tell the story. Like we're so big in, especially in marketing, right? It's so big of, you want to tell the story of the product. You know, that's what you would hear. You might hear that from an agency, you tell that. And this disputes that. It's like, well, the story might be okay, but we need material, dimensions, product type, product number in the description so it's easily scannable.
Yep. And I will say that with this one specific client, this one specific study, the description was vastly underrated in its value. And what a lot of times I see happen, not just with these guys, and they don't do this anymore, but a lot of times because the way the content's being fed in from the ERP or whatever other systems, the description ends up being just the title again, right? So to add to that, anytime that happened, I filtered out any description that was equal to the title, removed it, right? It's no added value, right? Yep. So there was additional cleanup in the data to try to get it as real as possible. So really the last one here, as you can see, material, if it was just in the specs or in the description and the specs. So remember, this was over 6,000 items. So it was very statistically relevant. And there were some other really interesting findings, but it didn't meet the criteria for being relevant. So I didn't include them in this document. The client saw it. So there's a lot to this. And it's about, I took a close look at keywords in a very specific category, right? It was in the breaker category. And was the term breaker and pole or amp, which I was told are like the top 3 keywords for that product. What were the conversion rates when they were in the titles? Okay. That's not part of this report, but that's the element. When we do something like this, we can get to that granular level.
So without talking about that one specifically, did you find lots of discrepancies about what they thought the keywords should be and what the keywords actually needed to be?
No, I can't say that because we only deep dove into one specific category for that analysis.
Got it. But with an analysis like this, you could pull out with conversion data, you could pull out, hey, most likely these are the keywords that are converting better for these categories if you're doing it custom for a customer.
Yeah, we could. Yes, we could definitely do it that way. I mean, what I did with them was I said, well, let's pick a category and tell me what the highest searched keywords were.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, marrying that data.
Because that's going to draw the traffic to the page, and that impacts the conversion rate.
Sure. Makes sense.
So that's kind of what we do. So it's really, I mean, I could have spent another 100 hours into this report easily, but if someone was going to do this, one, you have to audit every single page. Now, again, they had 150,000 items or so. We only did 6,000, and the idea is to do more, but you have to audit all of them. And I'm talking a detailed audit. You have to pull down the titles, the description. If your site has feature bullets, those, how many PDFs, what types of what was in the PDF? Is it warranty? Is it application? Right? All of those things. videos, 360s, every content element you need to be able to pull down. You need to customize your scoring, and you should do that by category level. And I'll give you like an example. If you were doing some basic bolts, right, nuts and bolts, your requirements for that is going to be a much lower bar than power tools and HVACs and et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to be able to have that fully customized. Then all of that, do all of your keyword searching, do all of your live versus master, right, versus the PIM, and see where your discrepancies are. And then after that, go ahead and apply your conversion rates across, then do the analysis. And when you're doing analysis, you have to kind of know where to look, right? So it has to be someone on the team that really understands product content. So they're knowing what's really to analyze and what's actually correlated. Because everything that I did, I also looked at the correlation value, whether it was very highly correlated or highly uncorrelated or somewhere in the middle, because you want to be able to make sure that your final cheat code guidance is actually impactful.
I would love to see click data on what the default image should be in certain categories on the search page. Should it be a box picture? Should it be a picture of the product? Should it be a close-up, far away? I bet there's a ton of amazing data, a ton of things that you could derive from that about, what on the search page versus the PDP, and what type of elements actually affect that. I think that would be fascinating.
I think it would actually as well. And I might go back and play in there again, because the other thing that I did for them as an option, and I wanted to see what you could do with AI content creation and enhancement. So out of all the 6,000 items that I audited, I incorporated some AI, gave it some rules, things to include, and then automatically rewrote every title, description, created feature bullets, and then created a French-Canadian version for it as well. It's just amazing, right? If you're not using AI every day in your normal workday, it's crazy, right? So that worked, but I could go back in there and have it analyze the image and tell me, is it a box shot? Yeah. Is it solid? Is it a pattern shot? All of that.
That's right. Interesting.
So really kind of at the end of this, really kind of the key takeaway is that you have to have that complete page experience. The content is highly correlated. The content elements are highly correlated to each other and the data within, right? That's why I say that it's not just, hey, here's your new standards. Go ahead and everybody do that. It does not work that way. And this is the first time that I actually have proof that it doesn't. This is why I was so blown away after being in this business for so long. I was like, oh my God, right? This is absolutely fantastic. I mean, what company wouldn't like to go get 10, 15, 20% or more higher conversion rates? What does that do to your business? Yeah. Even if it was just 10, people would kill for a 10% improvement rate, right? Yeah. And I'm telling you, it's much higher.
And it's got to increase traffic too. Like those changes has to increase traffic. So if you're influencing traffic and conversion numbers by any percentage point, the multiplication of that effect, isn't just increasing traffic by 1% and conversion by 1%. The multiplication of that makes it exponential. And yes. So that's a pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's a great point. And that's why, we started to do some of the studies on traffic rank and such, and what was driving the highest above or below. That's not shared in this report. But yeah, I mean, and it's not even just site search. It's your organic search as well. Sure. Pulling traffic in. So not only should the supplier want to do that, but the distributor wants to do that to draw that in as well.
So let's talk about it from those two angles. Let's start with the distributor and then work back to the manufacturer. So the distributor that's watching this, what's kind of their takeaway from your perspective here?
Well, It depends on the stage, right, of their e-commerce business. If they're just getting started, it depends on whether or not this is worth it. And there's two types of audits you can do. You can do a basic audit where we just look at all of your content and score it. And then the next level is looking at your conversion rates.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you're about to launch or you've only been up for a year, maybe it's not going to be the best results for you, specifically around the conversion cheat codes. But if you've been selling for a number of years and you're, 25 million, 50 million and up,
yeah,
you absolutely need to be, number one, focused on the content quality, which, by the way, brings me to another little pet peeve that I have, is that content readiness is not content quality. So your syndicator or your PIM will give you a content score that is not a quality score. Most likely it is not. Everyone that I've seen, it's just, is this a required field for this site? And is it blank or is it filled? Right? Is there a title? Yes, but that title could be the letter T.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Placeholder. I've seen that before. Right? That type of thing. So all it is a checkbox. It's not blank and it's a required field. Okay. Content quality is an actual full audit of every SKU across all the different content elements. Right. So that's where I start with clients is we do an audit, a large scale audit so we could actually see patterns. We want to do it across categories. We want to do it across suppliers so that nothing is swaying the data, right? It's all balanced. You start with that, and then you can look at, all right, let's put the conversion cheat codes or the conversion codes on top of that to determine and define what's driving the highest conversions. We then update your content standards so that your syndicators or your suppliers who are submitting content direct, those new standards should be in your setup sheet. Right?
Makes sense. And then
because otherwise you're just going to have to keep cleaning it over and over again.
Yeah. And then on the manufacturer side, where often your digital strategy as a manufacturer often is how well you control your content with your distributors, right? And how well you own that part and collaborate with your distributors. I would imagine the impact to them is if you can get any audit information about your brand specifically, would they share this data with their brands? Suppliers?
I do know that Rexel was planning on sharing this data with their suppliers. Yes.
So take that seriously because that literally can change your conversion rate on your brands with a specific distributor.
Yes. Right. So, and I was able to give them the scores by supplier, right? So they could just go ahead and bring that back out.
That's amazing.
Right. Because it's always about the why, right? You need content. How much did you spend on it? I don't know. I can do this. I can do this. I can get it from a pool. I can get it from AI. Well, you should understand exactly what the bottom line impact is going to be to then determine,
use your percentage.
Oh my God, I'm going to generate $8 million more this year. Well, yeah, you can go spend a couple $100,000 on improving that content easily.
Yep. That's an amazing insight, actually. So often we prioritize content by some arbitrary means, right? Maybe the products that sell the most, or largest margin, and you kind of work your way through it. What you're showing here is you can say, if you put $1 in here, you'll get $5 out the backside of this, and that's a no-brainer investment. Then I think that's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. And I think what the numbers that I've seen, it's easily a 1 to 10 or higher.
Wow.
And it's a gift that keeps on giving, right? That content that you fix this year is going to be great this year and the next year and the next year, because the shelf life on a lot of these is pretty lengthy.
Yeah. That's amazing.
If I'm the supplier now, if I'm standing in their shoes And it definitely seen an improvement in this. Like I know Hubble has some really good content. They've got content teams, 3M and others.
Yep.
So they've been really good at building out content towards the retail standards that Amazon wants, right? So that's great. But even companies like those, they still aren't following cheat codes. They're following the regurgitated standards, which isn't bad. It's better than the previous evolution, right? Much better. But now if you really want to stay ahead, this, I believe, is the next.
Well, I think to the core principle in B2B, our job is to help the customer do their job as easy as possible. It's not about being sexy and cool. It's about utility, right? It's about helping that customer get in and get out as quickly as possible. That's helping them do their job as easy as possible. And so when you look at things like that description and compared to retail, I'm telling you, like in retail, the standards are tell the story of the product, like be verbose about the product and describing it, right? And a retail channel versus in B2B, it might be, hey, depending on what the audit shows, it might be, talk about it in a very talk about that product in a very factual way. Put the dimensions in, put the specs in the description, have it multiple places, easily scannable versus any of kind of the storytelling that you would normally get in the retail environment. I think it's a very interesting perspective.
And the data supports exactly what you just said as well. More is not always better in regards to conversions. There were categories that definitely had a bell curve towards them.
Wow.
Right. And it's another reason. Let's look at the conversions for your products. Let's look at those descriptions. At what point does it maximize your conversions? All right. Well, so your actual conversion rates are highest on descriptions that max out at this length. All right. So what's in those?
Yeah.
Right. What needs to be in that 100 characters or whatever it tends to be for your product.
That's amazing. George, for companies that want to kind of go through this process with you, what's the way for them to reach out to you, get a hold of you? What's the best way for them to?
Yeah, so I'm allowed to share this document. So they can email me at georgek@productcontent.com.
Excellent. That's an amazing URL, by the way.
It is amazing.
George has it. I may be negotiating with George in the future about buying it from him. I know how much I know how much he bought it for, so I'm hoping to get it for a steal. So georgek@productcontent.com.
Yep. And that hopefully really by the time I think this is going live as well, I'll have a georgekoenig.com
excellent
live as well.
Right, because you want to sell productcontent.com to me. I got it.
Yeah, you know what I paid for it. It's nothing near what I would sell it for.
Oh, come on. Got to take care of your people. That's amazing. George, that's very cool. Everyone listening, go get this report from George. Reach out to him. But I think more importantly, there's this, being able to use this data, and George will teach you how to use the data, how to be able to collect it, put it into meaningful results for you. I think that's the bigger opportunity for everyone above these standards. Because like you said, these aren't really standards. These are just showing what surprising things there were in a couple categories in one industry versus your individual industry that you guys are all sitting in. So take advantage of him being here. Appreciate it, George.
Great. Thank you, Justin. Great as always.